So welcome everyone to Where's the Effin' Leadership? Global Online Summit, journeying deep into our evolutionary edges and beyond to reignite a new feminine leadership paradigm, where expert speakers are sharing their wisdom and knowledge on how we all must play our part in birthing a new kind of leadership that's fully inclusive, balanced, works with our energies, and is radically sustainable, as we remember who we are meant to be in this world. And today we have Sama Morningstar. Sama, it's so lovely to meet you here.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Sama Morningstar's whole life has been the preparation for the sacred calling to help people of all genders recognize, access, and activate the power of the womb, awakening, healing, and celebrating true femininity. 20 years ago, Sama was in the pit of despair, longing for the satisfaction of sustained intimate relationship, ecologically balanced community, and professional alignment with her soul purpose. With a fierce devotion to transforming all of humanity to live according to the principles of deep ecology, she started at the core of her own ecology, her womb, and now teaches others how to do the same. As the founder of the Womb-Centered Healing Temple, an online collaborative space devoted to this process, Sama endeavors to support ever more people to return to a womb-centered way of life in which we remember the importance of caring for each other and the planet. Sounds absolutely beautiful. And your topic today, Sama, is biomystical womb wisdom guided leadership. Mm-hmm. So, what does biomystical womb wisdom mean?
Well, if you break down the parts of that title, it's pretty self-explanatory. Explanatory, right? Planetary. I love playing with words. So, biomystical has biology and mysticism in it. And if any part of us has both of those in full measure, it's the womb. And I feel our whole being. We are biological beings and we are spiritual beings. And that is those two realms, two aspects of our being are interwoven, infused with each other and not separate. And many of our spiritual practices have shunned biology. Okay, many religious approaches have deemed our biology to be somehow dirty, sinful, bad, hindrance to our spiritual development. And many scientific biologists and scientists have shunned spirituality and mysticism, saying that in order to know if something's really true, we need to be able to sense it and with our 5 physical senses, right? And shunning any kind of, saying that it's just not valid or not true if people are having senses outside of those 5 senses and the ability to experience things outside of those 5 senses. So there's been this separation, this far apartness between biology, scientific, what we can observe with our senses, and mysticism, which is what we can observe with our more extra senses, right? More than those 5 senses. And each of those 2 sides have been saying, oh, that one's not worth listening to. That one's not worth listening to. And I'm saying, guess what? We're all of it, right? We have the capacity to experience and value all of it. And let's reweave that together. And what better place to start than the womb, where we all started. And that is a biomystical experience right there, our conception. So many people have mystical experiences during sexuality, in the act of conceiving a child. Unfortunately, many people do not have pleasure-filled mystical experiences, and yet we're designed for that. So biologically speaking, when we have an orgasm, and when the egg is fertilized by the sperm, there's an explosion of a substance called nitric oxide that's produced by our biology. It's a gas that's produced in our blood vessels. That is also the same thing that happens when people have a near-death experience. And that light that they're going towards. All right. So this is called, this gas is called the divine experience gas, or the divine. It's where biology and mysticism come together. Okay. So the moment it gives us that experience of complete euphoria and oneness with all things, and all of our biology functions at its best when we have that explosion going on in us, when that nitric oxide is plentiful in our system. So you can learn more about this. Christiane Northrup is an expert on this, and her book, The Secret Pleasures of Menopause, is one of the books where she writes about this, and how really making pleasure a devotional practice can optimize our health in all phases of our lives, especially those where, particularly women approaching menopause have a fearfulness of all the pleasure is going to be out of our lives now, and la, la, la. But that's true for anyone going through any phase of life or health issue where it's difficult. Pleasure is the key to healing and to having all of our organs function properly. Just a little side note about where this information is coming from. So conception is designed to be this experience of oneness and mysticism and biology all happening all at the same time. And so is everything else in life. I mean, that's the beginning of our life. And yet we have somehow gotten away from that with all of these belief systems that biology is separate from mysticism, that sex is sinful or bad, that we've all been programmed with and internalized over many, many, many thousands of generations. And so there are many people now that are rediscovering the ancient wisdom of womb-centered healing. So before patriarchy started making those separations forcefully and dominating the feminine with making the masculine dominant over the feminine and suppressing feminine power. Feminine power was womb-centered power, this power to, and is, this power to create new life, to bring a spirit into physical form, to do just that, whether that's making a baby or having an inspiration and implementing it in the physical world in a nourishing, loving way that's life generative and creative. And so there were spiritual approaches, and there's lots of archaeological evidence of this with all the goddess figurines that you see. A great book to read for background information about that is The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler, where she documents through archaeological evidence the what does she call it? matrifocal, or she has a
Yes,
special word. I can't remember exactly the word that she uses, because it's not matriarchal, which would mean the feminine is dominant over the masculine. That's not what it was. It was a harmonious partnership model of society that went on for thousands and thousands of years, where feminine power was revered. And the religion was about menstruation and the power of menstruation to generate new life, to keep life alive, right? And not only birthing new life, but keeping life alive. It was the same as the seasons of the year, and keeping life regenerating itself. That cyclical nature, it was aligned with the moon, the cycles of the moon, and all of these powerful cycles and circles of life is what it's like the wheel of life. You know, if we had square wheels, our cars wouldn't be going anywhere. We have round wheels, right? Everything goes somewhere because it's round, and it goes round and round. And so, so this biomysticism, the biomystical womb, is about returning to that place of reverence and of the feminine, and harmonious partnership between feminine and masculine energies, and reclaiming, well, first of all, recovering from, healing from a lot of the trauma that we've all experienced under this patriarchal model and patriarchal domination. Is a big first step to reclaim that feminine power, to bring it back online, because it's been quite suppressed, deeply buried out of fear inside of all of us, no matter what gender we are. You know, after millennia of violent suppression of our feminine power, you know, that we inherit that, okay, can't show that we can feel other people's feelings or even feel our own feelings. Can't show that we can see things outside of our visual range, or hear things outside of our audio range. You know, we can't show those extra senses or own them or activate them for fear of being violently, you know, obliterated, basically. And that's what's been going on. And now is the time for awakening and re-emerging, and re-merging our mystical side and our biological side, and awakening those very feminine powers for all genders. So I hope that answers your question.
It's really true. And you talk about the re-emerging of the feminine and the biology and the mysticism. That's beautiful. Yeah, really, it gives me tingles as well.
Tingles!
Most definitely.
Uh-huh.
How does this then biomystical and womb wisdom relate to leadership?
Well, first of all, many of the models of leadership that we see are domination-based and exploitation-based. So, for example, in politics, even in democracy, there is a sense of domination by those that are elected into leadership, and that the voice and the desires and the needs of the people are not so important. And that, you know, and so then that leader, that power, the person in power has power over everyone else. And so biomystical, or more feminine, or even uterine approach to leadership says we all have power within ourselves. We all have intrinsic power, and no one needs to have power over anyone else, because we all have intrinsic power, and we can have power, we can share power between us. And so a leader is, my acupuncturist gave a great image about it, coming into leadership herself, that is just gorgeous. So she said she had a dream that she was in a flock of birds and in a formation, sort of a triangular formation. And everyone's following that leader bird. And that periodically that leader bird would fall back along the side and come back to the back. And one of the other birds would then be in the leadership role. And then that bird would fall back after a while. And then one of the other birds would take that. And as that was going on, she said she was one of the birds in this vision, in this dream, was getting closer and closer to the front. And she was nervous about that. She didn't know if she'd be able to lead. But what she felt so strongly was that everyone behind her was moving her to the front. She wasn't trying to get to the front necessarily. She was nervous about it. She didn't know if she could handle that, right? Suddenly, there she was in the front, supported and moved forward by everyone behind her, so that it wasn't this huge, overwhelming job. She was just sort of riding the wave or surfing on the wave of where everyone was moving. And this was a very supportive thing for her as she's stepping into leadership in her in our community and in her life. And I've recently got to have the experience of being one of those birds behind her, really supporting her to step into leadership. And she's doing a fantastic job. And that kind of leadership benefits everyone. It benefits the leader because domination-based leadership is very depleting.
Yes.
And causes the eventual. It sort of necessitates exploitation of other people's power. Because when you are trying to dominate everything, that takes a lot of energy, more than we have inside of us. And many people who want to dominate, it's because they don't have that connection to their own inner power to begin with, and feel weak and not strong secretly inside, and have to prove their strength by dominating others and taking power from others. So they're really addicted to other people's power and consuming other people's power. And it requires a lot of manipulation, psychological manipulation. And in business, I studied psychology in college, and a lot of marketing, most marketing that you see nowadays is based on psychological studies that train marketers how to psychologically manipulate people, right? And prey and exploit people's psychological weaknesses and needs, taking their power away from them and exploiting them. And so that domination model requires that, because the dominator, the person in a dominating leadership role, has disconnected from their own sense of power, their own inner power. And nobody wants to be dominated, so they're not really having full consent to receive the power of the people they're leading. And this is all secretly going on underneath. People can say a whole bunch of other things besides what I'm saying and say that something else is happening than this, but ultimately this is what's
really happening. Yeah. I know I could feel it when I worked in corporate environments.
Right. And even, I've had this experience, even it's so deeply ingrained in us, this model of power over, that even it's really tricky, because as we're transitioning into a harmonious leadership, this other thing where everyone is connected to their inner power and voluntarily supporting a leader so they have the strength given to them to step into that leadership role. And it's usually they're not hungry for it. They're not hungry for that fame. They just have the skills and the willingness. And the people that in their community are, asking them to play that role. It's a big role to be in a leadership role. You have to do hard things. I know my acupuncturist has had to communicate with people in the community, very difficult things, and had to bring all of her skills to the table and did a fantastic job, but it was very difficult for her. And so she needed support, and she needed her own power to be fully connected, her own resources to be fully online, inner resources. And so there's just such a big difference. And even nowadays, as we're transitioning, there's a lot of people out there that are trying to take on leadership. There's a lot of spiritual leaders actually that are still doing the domination model, even if they say words to the contrary. What you find is they're still stuck in that power dynamic in some way. And I've had firsthand experience of that kind of leadership where they want to be doing something different and go to their deathbed realizing that, oh my goodness, I wasn't able to change this. I still did it. Maybe they realize it. Maybe they don't. Maybe they think they did change it. We don't know. But, well, some people, it's very clear that they think that they're very righteous, and yet they're completely ignoring the fact that there's all these abused people in their wake, feeling like their power was taken from them, and that they they weren't empowered by that teacher, even though that was supposedly the intention of the teacher. So it's a big change, and it requires a lot of self-awareness and a lot of honesty with the self and willingness to face our shadows. And the key to me, what I've seen is the key is to be willing to hold our own personal and collective trauma in tender awareness. And if we think that we've gotten through it all, check ourselves. Because my experience is that every time I get to a new level of healing and recovering from some piece of my trauma and get all good and feeling like, wow, okay, now I can really move forward, and my life is more full of pleasure and joy and strength and power than ever before. That's what's required for more deeply hidden and buried traumas to arise into that place. Because, and this type of leadership, especially in spirituality, this is a difference in leadership that I wanted to emphasize, because and how we can tell the difference in leadership. A lot of leaders, especially spiritual leaders, have a domination approach to the healing process. So, for example, dominating the ego. Okay, so those approaches, take people in and say, okay, we're going to tear apart your ego. We're going to just dismantle it vigorously, often violently. Okay, and so, they'll claim that discomfort, feels like a violent process is necessary. And that's what they're saying, in order to dismantle the ego so that you can build something new. Well, there's a more feminine approach that recognizes the ego as like a scab on a wound, oftentimes, at least the unhealthy aspects of our ego, and also recognizes that the ego, a healthy ego development, is part of being human, a healthy human, to have a healthy identity and a healthy ego. All right, so a lot of these domination-based spiritual practices are still like normal, healthy human things, like attachment to other humans in relationship. We can't live without attachment. If we don't create healthy attachment bonds with babies, they die. All right. So, and yet many domination-based spiritual leaders talk about unattachment. Right. So that's not a life-enhancing approach to spirituality. That's a away from life approach. Okay. And away from biology. Okay. So that's a dissociative approach. All these transcendent ascension approaches, getting away from our biology. Yeah. So, what I feel is more feminine approach to leadership, and especially spiritual leadership, which essentially any leadership is going to be spiritual leadership, because you're stepping forth as an example of how to live and what to believe in, and those are all very spiritual decisions of like, okay, how am I going to be in this world? And so this more feminine approach recognizes the ego, especially the the difficult aspects or the unhealthy aspects of the ego, as, like I said, a scab on a wound. And as a loving mother isn't going to rip off that scab and re-wound the wound, the loving mother is going to nourish that person and enhance their intrinsic healing capacities, bring them back to an orientation of pleasure and love, and trust in the healing. Our biological healing capacities mirror our emotional and spiritual healing capacities. Intrinsic, we all have that intrinsic wisdom within us. So a more feminine oriented leader is going to nourish and validate each person's intrinsic wisdom and intrinsic connectivity to their own inner guidance. And as that grows stronger, then that scab just falls off effortlessly. And that might be tender underneath the scab for a bit, but if that inner wisdom is growing, it's nourishing it from underneath and growing new skin there and healing up those wounds. And so, one of my mentors talked about, breaking apart already broken people isn't very conducive to healing. What that other model creates, is dependency on those teachers to keep piecing them back together again. Yeah. And it ends up creating, that's how cults end up happening, where people get broken apart. This is often the strategy when people join a cult. They're in pain. They see the people in the cult glowing with joy or pleasure, whatever it is, they're drawn to that. And the charismatic leader tears apart all of the things that make up their identity, and then infuses them with this other experience crafted by the leader. Usually these are the practices that you have to do to sustain it and maintain it. And then those people are completely dependent in order to feel good on those methods of feeling good, and have never been reconnected to their own inner resources.
it feels like a breaking of the spirit in the old, I say old ways, lots of current ways of leadership in that dominant way. It feels like we're breaking people's spirits.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful metaphor of the scab and how the innate ability of our bodies to heal themselves with the right nurturing and support and guidance. It's very powerful.
Yeah. And this applies to all aspects of life. So whether we're stepping into leadership in business, right? The way I apply it there is, how are we doing marketing? Are we poking at people's wounds and saying, I have the solution? Or are we pointing to people's inner power and inviting them to access that? And saying, yes, that's difficult, and I'm here if you want support with that.
Yes.
And then giving them the power to make that choice themselves, and validating, no matter how, even if I might recognize that, for example, that a potential new client or a potential new student in my work has a wounding-based excuse for why they can't do it, or they can't pay the money, or they, whatever their reason is, validating the underlying wisdom in that. And I've actually fired or stepped away from a number of business coaches that were trying to coach me into coming to that moment where a potential client is saying, oh, I can't afford that, and wanting to coach me into, talking them out of that somehow, when I see that as intrinsic wisdom.
Yeah.
They're not ready. They're not at that moment of, I have to do this no matter what, I'm going to make it happen. I want people coming to me to be in that place. I have to do this no matter what, I'm going to make it happen, to find their own power. Yeah. I don't want to manipulate them into that place, because then they're dependent on me from then on out, and it's a lot more work. And I'm no good at it to boot.
And very draining to
it's
have
very draining.
So many dependents.
Yeah, it's very draining. So I've said, okay, you've gotten to the same place that I see everybody else getting to when I get business coaches like that. And I finally said to myself, okay, and I had one of my mentors say, my womb is my business coach, basically. Mm-hmm. And for me, what that means, if we think about the womb, and if we think about how, biologically speaking, a womb creates a new life and nurtures a new life to maturity. A woman is able to do that. Of course, it needs a whole community support, right? To really be fully flourishing in our ability as women to do that. We need support from our partners. Certainly our conception partner has to be involved in the process of nourishing that conception, that spark of new life, whether it's a creative idea or an actual baby. But if we're looking at the biology of the womb, that initial conception, and ideally it's a mutually orgasmic experience, right? That womb is designed to have prolonged orgasms, to really lay the groundwork for a healthy life. As we said before, remember the nitric oxide, that pleasure, that burst of orgasmic pleasure is intensely beneficial to life. It's just the way it is. And so in order to really nourish a healthy life to grow inside the womb, we want big, long orgasm to start, right?
Yeah.
And preferably many more after that, and preferably many more prior to that. Okay. So for me, pleasure is a big part of my business model. Okay, and certainly sexual pleasure, but all aspects of pleasure. So, and there are infinite aspects of pleasure. Taking pleasure in this interview, for example.
Yes.
Right? Taking pleasure, receiving the pleasure in each moment of everything that I'm doing, and finding a business model that truly gives me pleasure. I love talking to people. Zoom is my friend. Okay. Yeah. I love having these interviews. I have a podcast. I love it. I totally enjoy doing that. I'm in my living room on my nice, cushy, velvety couch. You know, I have my herbs hanging behind me, and I get to speak with people all over the world about things that I love talking about. This is tremendously pleasureful for me. It's the foundation of my business model. Okay, pleasure. Yeah. So, pleasure in leadership then. Here I am, people see me having a lovely time, just totally enjoying connecting with you, having a conversation. That's leadership. Wow, life, business could be that pleasurable? How could that be true for me, right? How could I be having as much fun as Sama in my business?
Am I allowed to?
Am I allowed to? That's right. Yeah. That's right. Of course you are. I am. I give myself and everyone else permission to fully enjoy.
Yes.
Okay. So that, that's the foundation. So starting off with pleasure. Pleasure. What gives us pleasure? And I have business mentors that definitely emphasize that. And ultimately, my womb is the source of that. The deep wisdom inside me that resides inside of me. And we all have that. Doesn't matter what gender we are. We all have that deep source of pleasure. We might have different organ structures, but we all have that deep source of pleasure and that capacity to generate pleasure in our lives and follow that. So that's the starting place. And then how does the womb nourish and nurture new life? First of all, that initial spark of intuition and inspiration, big burst of pleasure, and then it goes into the dark. We don't know. So I often, see, you might see there's a big community of people that are all about manifesting and writing lists and lists of all the specific details of what exactly it is that you want and doing all kinds of things around that to get exactly what it is that you want. Well, that's not how creation happens. Creation happens in the dark. And without all of this, technology that we have now, what naturally happens in our biology is that we have to use other senses to even know that we're pregnant to begin with. A lot of women can have that feeling that they know, okay, but there's no outward sign. There's nothing, that maybe it's your sense of touch. You might have a sense of, but the tiny little egg is so small, it's no different than a blood cell passing through your veins, and you're not aware of every blood cell passing through your veins, right? Yeah. But that's the beauty of the feminine body, is that we can be so sensitive to the tiniest little cell moving through us and feel that. And scientists would say that's not possible, that we don't have the senses for that. And that just goes to show you how limited our current scientific model is.
Yeah.
that it doesn't recognize our capacity for that degree of sensitivity. So it's often in the dark. We may or may not be able to feel it. It begins to grow inside of us because we're nourishing ourselves. We're taking care of ourselves. If we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not taking care of our health, guess what happens? It doesn't take root. That creative idea, that baby, doesn't take root and gets passed. And most pregnancies don't ever get past that first menstrual cycle that would have happened because it doesn't take root. We're not taking good enough care of ourselves. Something isn't quite right. And the womb knows, you know what? We can't gestate a baby right now. It's a miracle to me that so many people in such difficult circumstances end up gestating babies to begin with, because it's so, there is this wisdom of, we're just going to let that one go.
Yeah. And
so, and that goes for creative ideas and business ideas and business relationships. If we're not taking good enough care of ourselves, then it doesn't take root. It doesn't get a foothold in our lives. And so that those first, that first trimester in the dark, right? Got to take good care of yourself or it's not going to take hold. And then the quickening. Whoa, something's happening in there. Feeling a bigger movement. But we still don't know all the details of who this person is going to be and what it's going to, imagine a mother, writing down every quality of her child when that child is an adult and insisting that that's going to be who their child. I can imagine if she was really in touch with her intuition and her listening to the spirit of that baby, she might get information like that. And lo and behold, that baby becomes that. But if she is, I've seen countless parents, I've been a school teacher before, and I've seen countless parents pressuring their children to meet their list of requirements for who they should be. And that creates very unhappy humans, very unhappy, that approach to parenting. And so there's a connected way of knowing what's actually happening. And there's a disconnected way of deciding what's going to happen and making it so. So that's the distinction between the feminine leadership that's about these other senses, this inner knowing, this inner power of knowing what's actually happening and the beauty of that and allowing the beauty of that and receiving, so for a creative project, for example, my business, for example, just receiving the inspiration, giving of myself fully in devotion to this calling that I feel, not knowing what it's supposed to look like. I can't tell you how many times I've, listened to coaches and leaders that say you have to make a detailed plan. It just is a waste of time because I can, when I really listen to my intuition, it's vague. Sometimes there's specifics, but then they change. Like I went and did, when I fully stepped into, okay, no more coaches outside of my own womb. And I went on a pilgrimage to Avalon, Glastonbury, England. I went and assisted a course I had to complete a 2-year apprenticeship I'd done with womb-centered healing. And I took extra time for my own personal pilgrimage in Glastonbury, and I went to the Chalice Well, which is a red spring. So the water comes out of the earth there and turns everything red. So it's almost like the earth is menstruating there, right? And so I took my menstrual blood. I happened to be bleeding the first week that I got there. And I made offerings of my blood there at each of the shrines. The Chalice Well is a world peace garden, and it has beautiful goddess shrines all over and old ancient sacred trees all over. And so I went around at the whole grounds and made offerings. And then I sat down under this beautiful tree, and I had recorded a meditation for myself, because that helps me to stay focused and not just stare off into the clouds under the tree, right? And I took out my notebook and I listened to my meditation that was guiding me and supporting myself, nourishing myself with my own skills, to listen to my inner guidance about the direction of my business. And just the words came pouring out into my notebook with very specific details, no effort at all. And then I went back and a few weeks later, after I'd gone and assisted at the workshop, and I came back and I went back to the Chalice Well and sat back down again and wrote out several more pages. And I came back and I'm like, okay, this is my plan. This is my business plan. I began implementing things. Well, in the implementation process, there were different things that were needed than what I had written on the page, or what I had written on the page might eventually develop years down the line, but right now we're doing something else that's kind of on the way, and feeling that as we go and allowing the evolutionary process. So a mother might have a vision for her child being, a certain way as when they grow up. And yet when they're a 2-year-old, they're not that yet. Yeah. Right? And a loving mother is going to love that 2-year-old just how they are right now, and nurture that 2-year-old and allow that 2-year-old to make the mistakes it needs to make in order to learn what it needs to learn in order to become that person that mother is holding that vision for. And that mother may hold that vision for that child's entire life. And that child might not get to that vision of who that mother felt the spirit purpose, the soul purpose of that child coming through her, until they're in their 50s. That mother might not be alive anymore. But that mother's job as a mother was to hold that vision for that child in a loving way that wasn't like insisting that child be that vision right now. Yeah. And so that's the similar thing with having a business plan. And for me, stepping into leadership with that is, okay, this vision was big. It was to create the womb-centered healing temple and have it be a collaborative space, and have all of these founding members that were also offering their teachings and their courses and their events in the temple. And, my first thing was, okay, here's all the requirements to be a founding member with me, and here, sending it out to all these people. And they're like, whoa. I'm not ready to start a new platform with you, Even people that I'd already developed a healthy collaborative relationship with, they're like, whoa, I've got my own projects. I'm not going to jump in with all of this. I'm like, oh, yeah, right. You're not. No, this is like down the line after we've been working together for a while, maybe we'll end up having that kind of a collaborative relationship. And so, allowing things to develop and to be where they are, and allowing myself to develop and be where I am, is how I can be in healthy leadership, feminine leadership for myself in my own life. Instead of insisting that I be where I'm supposed to be now, and manipulating myself and everyone else around me in order to get there now.
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable. You know, it puts it like, even people who manage to use these, you know, templates to get to 6 figures in 6 months, or, you know, 6 weeks, or whatever it is, that doesn't sustain itself.
Yeah, it feels like it's that balance between controlling how we think we want things to be, and that surrender, you know, or going with the intuition and the deep wisdom
Mm-hmm.
that we will, our womb wisdom can lead us there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Indeed. And so there's many aspects to this, you know, like in my business, for example, you know, some of these business coaches would be quite abusive towards people who, you know, couldn't pay their prices. And I've been realizing that, you know, the capitalist model of exploiting people and convincing them that in order to get out of their suffering, they have to pay all this money to get the thing that I have, right? It's just not who I am. I can't do it. And so what I can do, and how because I didn't start out with a trust fund, you know, with tens of thousands of dollars to pay for the coaching that I need. I've had to, you know, I traded building steps down a hill to a garden over the course of a very rainy winter to get a car. You know, it's like from my, you know, one of my mentors, you know, I bought their car with the agreement, with no cash, with the agreement to build the steps in the garden in the rain.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't even want me to do it in the rain, but there was a lot of rainy days and I wanted to get it paid off.
Trading services.
Right? So, you know, I include that in my business model and do a lot of that. So right now, for example, for my, I have a 9-month apprenticeship coming up. It's called the Biomystical Womb Healing 9-moon apprenticeship. And I'm in the process of writing a book about this healing process of the biomystical womb healing process. So starting at conception and even prior to conception, connecting with our soul purpose, and then giving ourselves, nourishing these biomystical initiations that were neglected throughout our lives. Okay, so that means conception, birth, gestation, birth, the different phases of gestation, birth, early childhood, menarche or teenage, you know, coming into sexual maturity for any gender can participate in that kind of way. That those initiations are so egregiously neglected, to everyone's detriment. You know, first sexuality, you know, fertility awareness, and the development of our being, our creative process based on our biological creative center, our fertility, our sexual being, right? Our life generative energy sources. So that, you know, initiating ourselves into all of that. And then, of course, childbirth, birthing our first child, or birthing our first big creative endeavor.
Yeah.
Right. Partnership, marriage, partnership, romantic partnership, initiating healthfully into that. So many people have not experienced healthy initiation into that. And then those blueprints of the first time carry on with us through our lives, right? So going back and retroactively initiating, and then preparing for future initiations, for menopause, for our wisdom years. Any gender can prepare for wisdom years, where the way that we create changes, deepens, grows more effortless, is more infused with wisdom. And so doing this whole biomystical reprogramming of our whole life is what the program is about. It's a 9-month apprenticeship. I have many people who haven't done this type of initiation are struggling with money. Our womb space is the center of our survival energy, of how we interface with the material world, of how we sustain ourselves. Yeah. And if it's struggling from not being initiated and developed, very likely we're going to be struggling with money. And there are some people that have the privilege to have generational wealth handed down to them in one way or another. But many people don't. And so what I'm doing to remedy that is say, okay, if you want to do this program and you really want to do it, and the financial commitment that I ask for it, which is very reasonable, is a hardship for you, then you can be a case study in my book. And then what you do is you'll write about your experiences of all the things that we do during the apprenticeship, with the permission that I can just put your writings into the different sections of the book to share with the readers about how this process works and the different how it helps you. And then that's also giving me information, because there may be aspects of this program that really work for me, but that don't work for someone else. So then I can develop, hearing all that, reading all the experiences that people share, I can develop my program to meet the needs of more people.
Beautiful.
And so they're giving me a tremendously valuable service. And I even have one of my apprentices is designing the logo for the Biomystical Womb, and perhaps she'll design the book cover.
Oh, beautiful. So it's these reciprocal exchanges.
Yeah, and the benefits of going through this program, she sees, and I have maybe 8 to 10 case studies signed up now. And everyone sees how the program is going to benefit them throughout the rest of their life. And they're willing to give me their writings, their artistic contribution to my book, which will then benefit me and many, many, many people throughout the rest of their life. So this model of leadership is what I like to say is a womb-centered model of leadership and business, where the original reason we created money was to make sure that everybody's needs were met. That was the feminine, there's some theories that say women invented money to make sure everyone's needs were met, because I might have chickens with eggs and you have chickens with eggs, but I have something else you want. I don't need your chickens. I don't need your eggs, because I have my own chickens and eggs. So someone else needs chickens and eggs. So they get their chickens and eggs, and then they give you some cowrie shells to say they gave me chickens and eggs. Oh, okay, so you can give me some cowrie shells and I'll give you my tomatoes.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. It just, it's so intuitive and yet turns leadership on its head. It's beautiful.
Well, it turns domination-based leadership on its head. Yeah. And it just demonstrates how domination-based leadership is not to the benefit of anyone involved.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And yet many domination-based leaders make a case for we have to do it this way and it benefits everyone, when it's not true. It's an addiction-based model, an exploitation-based model. Yeah. And there's a wonderful, I don't know the name of this author, but I heard a talk through Tree Sisters. They did interviews with authors, and this one was a scientist who looked at chaos systems theory and did a lot of biological research from like before anything was alive on the planet except little tiny microorganisms, and watched the evolution of these microorganisms, and saw that there was a period when the microorganisms were consuming each other almost to the point of depleting their own food source and their own extinction, which is exactly where we're at as a species right now.
Yeah.
And that in order for that dominating, consuming microorganism to survive, it had to shift, and all the organisms shifted to a cooperative model where they wouldn't deplete their resources, and then they could survive. And they began to cooperate and create communities where all of the microorganisms got their needs met and no one was over-consuming the others.
Yeah.
And we're at the brink of that evolutionary leap that's modeled in our early biology. And this is just a natural evolutionary phase.
Yeah.
And that's what the biomysticism can help us to recognize, that, oh, we don't have to feel that there's anything bad about this. We can adopt the sort of, it's all part of life attitude of scientists. There's no, in a good scientist, there's no judgment about one thing happening another way or a different way in different species, or whatever's happening is just what's happening, right? There's no like good or bad about it, right? So we can adopt that to our own evolution as a species, which alleviates a lot of like the guilt and the shame about, how things are in the world, but not so much that we just don't take any responsibility, because we see the detrimental effects to everyone to maintain this domination, overconsumption way of being. And we need to shift into a cooperative, harmonious partnership way of being. So another book by Riane Eisler that I recommend is called The Real Wealth of Nations, where she applies what her philosophies from the Chalice and the Blade of how we're evolving towards a cooperative, partnership-based way of being to economy, and how the economics, the way that it is in our capitalist structures and like that, and most business models and the corporate model of exploitation actually costs more money and is detrimental to the businesses and to the economy, because we're not recognizing the huge value of caring for each other.
Yes.
We don't place value on that. So, a plumber can make, $100 an hour after having gone through many, many long years of training. And, we value a plumber way more than we value a child care provider who isn't required to have hardly any training and gets, $10 an hour,
Yeah.
15. And yet the child care provider is taking care of children in their most delicate and important developmental phases. And science has shown us that these developmental years are hugely important. And if they aren't, addressed and nurtured, that perpetuates a lot of the trouble that we have in our society.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet we're not valuing childcare providers.
Yes. Yeah.
Economically. We're not valuing motherhood economically.
Yes.
Right? So typical feminine jobs and roles are not valued in our economic system. So she just spells it out in this book. It's fantastic. And she shows how businesses that are adopting a complete economy that includes caretaking of each other, caring for each other, caring for the employees, making sure, offering caretaking services to the employees, having employee retention, is, and various other things of caring for each other, is a huge financial benefit, because they don't have all the hidden losses of employee turnover, employees taking a lot of sick leave, not being able to take care of their family. There's just huge costs.
Yes.
And, it goes the same with environmental costs. Not taking care of our environment, not taking care of the planet is creating huge costs. Exploiting the planet is creating huge costs.
Yeah.
So I could go on and on about the shift.
It feels like another, definitely another summit on this, definitely.
Yeah.
I've just received in the post Ryan Eisler's newest book, Creating a Nurturing Economy.
Lovely.
So yeah, I haven't read it yet, but I love it.
Okay, so she's written another book on this.
Yeah,
okay.
Just out. Yeah.
Just out. Lovely. And I like the title. It really lands what she's talking about. The other one, The Real Wealth of Nations, is sort of a play on another, The Wealth of Nations is another, it was, and so it's a play on that. And so this one is like really bringing it home to what she's really talking about. Lovely, lovely, lovely.
Yeah. So yeah, really, really fantastic. So would you like to say something about your generous free gift that you're offering people?
Yes, I would like to say about that. So one of the foundations of my biomystical womb healing work is womb listening. So I've referred to it a little bit throughout this discussion of that connectivity to our inner source of power and wisdom, which is residing in our womb space. Now, this is true for anyone, regardless of what gender you are, regardless of the physical state of your genitalia and your reproductive organs, whether they are the way that they were when you were born or whether there have been changes over the course of your life. We all have a womb space. We all have a space in us that connects us to the spirit realm directly. In Sanskrit, it's called the Purusha, and it's located just below the navel and back towards the spine, which is exactly where the uterus is, if we have one. It's also sort of right in the center of any other reproductive organs that we might have. So I call it the womb space. It connects us to the womb of our mother, our grandmother, our great-grandmother, back through the generations and forward through the generations. And it connects us to spirit. It's where spirit can come through us to be implemented to become part of physical reality. And that's also where we can access our own inner source of wisdom. And so womb listening is a meditation that I do, and I can do it very quickly. In fact, it's kind of happening all the time at this point, where that's my source of information and wisdom. And there's a nerve that goes directly from the womb, directly to the brain. So once we connect that and recognize that and acknowledge that, then that we can know that information directly. And a lot of people call it their intuition or a gut feeling. Well, the gut is definitely involved. We have a lot of nerves in the belly, in the whole belly, and there's more nerves in the belly than there are in your actual brain. So we have a lot of wisdom in our belly area, a lot of emotional wisdom that's been forbidden or oppressed. And then when we zero in on that womb space and listen to the wisdom from there, it can often be very clear, very direct, and very to the moment, very current. It can be taking into account things outside of our ability to know and weaving it together just instantaneously and setting us this step right here in front of us in the right direction. So I love to share this sort of initiatory meditation into womb listening with folks. So the link will be available, I imagine, on the page here where we're offering this.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for your generous gift. And I can't
Thank you.
wait to listen, do some womb listening meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up our talk?
Well, just that I think I shared a little bit about my biomystical womb 9-moon apprenticeship.
Yes.
That will be, when this airs, that will be already underway. But if you'd like to learn more about that, then when you sign up to get that womb listening meditation, you'll also get on my mailing list, and I'll be keeping you posted about how to get involved with that, though, because there'll be ways to get involved even though the apprenticeship has already started. So.
Lovely. Lovely. And your podcasts, you mentioned them as well. You've got a really interesting selection of podcasts too that I've seen you offer.
Yeah, I have it's called the Womb Centered Healing Podcast, and I've interviewed quite a lot of different womb centered healing practitioners, from midwives, doulas, to activists, to sexual healing coaches, to menstrual healing and reverence-based coaches, to just a wide variety of, and then I also just get on there and talk just myself. I guess I interview myself on there too on a regular basis and share my insights and inspirations about womb-centered healing. So you can find that on most podcast platforms. You can just do a search for the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast.
Beautiful. And I can put a link below this video as well.
Lovely. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much for talking today and sharing so much of your wisdom. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, likewise. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.